Hello, everybody. Today, I'm going to be analyzing a popular graphic novel, Scott Pilgrim's Precious Little Life, written and illustrated by Bryan Lee O'Malley. It's the first in a six-part series of graphic novels about the titular 23-year-old Canadian Scott Pilgrim and how his precious little life is turned upside down when he meets and falls head over heels for someone who's definitely packing more baggage than he was expecting. Over the course of my time reading Scott Pilgrim's Precious Little Life, it was easily apparent this wasn't a compilation, this was a true graphic novel. You have the storytelling of a novel, it's over the course of 161 pages, and it reads page by page like a novel would, with all of the dialogue feeling naturally flowing and such. It even has the traditional three-act structure. You have Act 1 with all the rising action, you have Act 2 which seems to run a little longer than most second acts that I would see in other media, where it then reaches a climax, and then it goes into falling action from there, and the denouement, which is a cliffhanger. The transition between Act 1 and Act 2, this begins on page 35 of the book, when Scott Pilgrim, he finally sees for the first time the girl that is in his dreams, this rollerblading girl, Ramona Flowers. He sees her for the first time in real life. Up until this point, the establishment of all the characters in the book, from Kim Pine, Stephen Stills, all of the other cast members, Wallace Wells, his roommate, all of the characters revolving in Scott's life have been explored at least briefly up until page 35. But the real story arc begins from there, as Scott kind of spirals into this obsession about Ramona Flowers. He's just infatuated with her. He wants to know more about her. And this is all while he is dating a high schooler, Knives Chow. But he doesn't end the relationship with Knives. He just starts to manically pursue Ramona Flowers. I heard that she was dating a guy in New York. I don't know what it is about her. I gotta know more. What's her deal? Where does she work? I heard it was Amazon.ca. What website is that? Roommates Wallace says Amazon.ca. It's hysterical. All of this comes to a head with the events in Act 2, with Scott literally following Ramona in one of his dreams, waking up, running to his door, after having ordered something via Amazon.ca, and she is there delivering it. And he says that we should go out, and stuff like that. It moves forward, and it eventually leads to them spending the night together, them kissing, but this is all still in Act 2. It's all still building up to the climax, which the only real climax that I can think of is when the band is going to finally meet up, play a gig, and the whole event where it's kind of coming to a head, Ramona and Knives are now in the same room as each other with Scott, but he kind of plays it off and runs to start playing on stage. And it's at this point where all of that tension would actually be like kind of brought to a head, that as soon as the music starts, the whole story shifts right into Act 3 as Matthew Patel, one of the ex-boyfriends of Ramona Flowers, busts through the ceiling in a big splash page and says, "Didn't you get my email? We're fighting now." And the whole rest of the book is resolving that fight. Matthew Patel is defeated, and Ramona says, "I'll consider dating you, Scott, if you defeat my 7 evil exes. You've just defeated Matthew Patel. The other 6 are still out there." So that's where the story ends for this book, but it also ends with a cryptic series of panels where Ramona starts glowing almost and becomes kind of robotic in a way when her ex-boyfriend Gideon is brought up. And Scott seems a little bit concerned, confused, and almost frightened by how that occurs. So all of this comes together to provide a decently solid story arc, but it's mostly set up for future books. And while it does have a clear beginning, middle, and end, the resolution, it's more of just a cliffhanger. And I have gathered that most of the books are like this, where there's just a cliffhanger leading into the next one, into the next one, into the next one, until the final book. Um, but I feel like the character that gets primary focus here is the title character, Scott. There's no real other question about it, is that Scott is the central focus of everything that is happening in the entire book. There's not really much of a change, though. It's more of him denying what he is supposed to be doing or what would be best to do in the situations that are presented. Like Wallace Wells saying, you have to break up with Knives. If you're going to hang out with Ramona and become boyfriend and girlfriend, you two have to break up. And he almost sees that more as a inconvenience, which that's kind of scummy on his part, but that's his character. And he doesn't really grow out of that by the end of the book. He doesn't even break up with her by the end of this book. I'm assuming that happens in a future one, and if it doesn't, there are issues. Moving back to the actual comic itself and the transitions therein, there's a lot of specific ones. The moment to moment is the one that caught my eye the most throughout the entirety of the book, from page 1 all the way to the ending of the book. There were so many moment-to-moment transitions that I almost lost count. It was dizzying to see that, because it made the conversations flow so naturally throughout the book. Characters would change their expressions slightly, panel to panel, but it would keep almost the exact same drawing in a way, but their expression would change and they would say something, and it made them seem so expressive whenever they talked. Not to mention the fact that everyone in the book is already so expressive with their dialogue. It makes them all feel very different character-wise. There weren't many non sequiturs in the book. The only one that I could really consider are possibly moments where they would be the events that happen are explained in future books, such as Scott and Ramona diving into a door that just somehow leads to her apartment. There are the action-to-action scenes that show up during the climax with Scott fighting Matthew, and they are very dynamic. The action-to-action is very expressive there. The transitions in Scott Pilgrim's Precious Little Life are easily identifiable what type they are. They're not exactly as clear about the setting, and that's more left up to the characters themselves and the events unfolding in the actual story. You'll have moments where a transition between one scene to another is just led to by a little bar of text at the top of the screen that just says, "So then, ... And you see that a number of times throughout here. It kind of carries on, just like I said, the conversations flow very naturally. It almost feels like a conversation moving from one scene to the next. It really does take advantage of it being a comic. The pages as mini comics, as you would put them, are effective in the sense that you are following everything in order on the page as a conversation is flowing, with all these characters constantly talking back and forth. With all that in mind, I would highly recommend this to my classmates, to my immediate friends as well. I could see why the series has gained so much popularity, and it makes me want to actually borrow more copies from a friend. Actually, my buddy Jack, he is already a fan of the series, and he lent me this copy so I could review it and analyze it for all of you. And I am now understanding why he became such a big fan of it, because he enjoys witty banter and dialogue, and so do I. And so this book is chock full of it. I imagine the entire series is like this. I would recommend it to my classmates just on the fact that it does moment-to-moment transitions so well and so frequently throughout its pages. So many panels dedicated just to conversation, and all of them are interesting just because of how the characters talk to each other. Also, a fun fact, if you're in the same boat as I am regarding this, then I'll tell you a fun fact that there is a film based on this graphic novel series called Scott Pilgrim vs. the World. It was directed by Edgar Wright, my personal favorite movie director. He directed the Three Cornettos trilogy, that being Shaun of the Dead, Hot Fuzz and The World's End, my personal favorite movie. And so I've heard that it has a lot of impressive transitions on screen that make it seem more like a comic book, and it carries over all of that witty dialogue. That's what Edgar Wright is known for. So I can only imagine just how wonderful that is. So if you are interested at all in reading these graphic novels, I highly encourage you do so. I also highly encourage you to look at the film. I've heard that there are major differences. That's to be expected, though. But ultimately, this is what I thought of Scott Pilgrim's Precious Little Life, written and illustrated by Bryan Lee O'Malley. I hope you all enjoyed this little mini review / analysis, and I hope you guys have a wonderful rest of your weekend.